Hey there! Welcome to Pulse of the People, where real voices get heard. We dive deep, speak boldly, and break down social and political issues from the people's point of view, raw, honest, and unfiltered. Did you catch the recent buzz around the former president's latest public appearances and statements?
Yeah, there's definitely been chatter.
It's got a lot of people talking, raising some pretty serious eyebrows. Today, we're diving into the specifics of what's been said and, the potential ripple effects.
It's certainly a moment where a lot of observations are being made,
Yeah.
and understanding the context and potential implications of these remarks is, well, it's key for anyone following the political landscape.
Okay, let's start with something that's been kicking around this idea, this concern about the former president's fitness for office.
Mhm.
It's interesting how some are drawing a parallel to the legal world, specifically this concept of declaring a doubt about a criminal defendant's competency. What's the core of that analogy here?
Well, the analogy, it really highlights concerns about an individual's capacity to, understand and fulfill the demands of a really high-pressure role. In law, declaring a doubt triggers a formal process, right, to assess someone's ability to participate in legal proceedings.
Right.
So when you apply that to the presidency, it raises questions about the mental acuity needed for, like, complex decision-making and leadership.
Right. And it's not just abstract, is it? People are pointing to some very specific instances, even just in the last week or so.
Exactly.
One that got some attention was the former president's appearance at what some sources described as Pope Francis's funeral, where he reportedly looked disheveled and seemed to be dozing off. Now, just to be clear for everyone listening, we do need to be precise about the timing of any such observations relative to actual events. Details matter here.
Absolutely. But the perception itself, that's what's fueled some of this discussion, regardless of the precise event context sometimes. Public appearances are always under scrutiny, aren't they? And while interpreting someone's demeanor, well, it can be subjective. Repeated observations like that can contribute to a broader narrative about their overall well-being and, fitness for demanding responsibility.
Absolutely. Then there was that ABC interview with Terry Moran about the Declaration of Independence.
Ah, yes. I saw clips of that.
The former president claimed he had a real copy in the Oval Office and described it as a declaration of unity and love and respect. Now, when we think about the Declaration, what are its actual foundational principles, historically speaking?
Well, historically, the Declaration of Independence is primarily understood as a formal statement by the American colonies announcing their separation from British rule.
Right, breaking away.
Exactly. While it certainly invokes ideals like unity and fundamental rights, life, liberty, pursuit of happiness, and all, that its core purpose was really to assert the right to self-governance and, crucially, list the grievances that led to the revolution.
So the emphasis on unity and love and respect as the primary definition.
It's an interesting interpretation, let's say, given its historical context, as a document essentially declaring a breakup based on specific complaints. Moran seemed a bit taken aback, too, I think.
It definitely sparked some reaction, yeah, to say the least. And kind of related to recalling events accurately, there's also that instance where the former president mentioned the Philadelphia Eagles being at the White House yesterday.
Oh, right, when they were actually there on Monday.
Exactly, on Monday. It seems like a small thing, maybe, but these kinds of details, they add up for some observers.
They can. These kinds of minor inaccuracies in recalling recent events, especially when seen collectively, can raise questions for some about cognitive processing, maybe short-term memory.
Yeah.
Particularly when you're evaluating someone for a role that demands constant awareness and recall.
Okay, let's maybe shift gears a bit to the economic front. There's been a lot of talk about the former president's views on tariffs.
Big topic.
Specifically, his mention of 145% tariffs on China. He described it as basically an embargo and said something like China probably will eat those tariffs.
Right. What's the economic reality of a tariff that high? 145%.
Wow, yeah, 145% tariff would indeed create a huge barrier to trade. It would act effectively as a near embargo for many goods, just as he suggested.
Okay.
But while the tariff is initially paid by the importer, the economic impact doesn't just stop there. That's the key thing. Businesses will almost certainly pass those increased costs onto consumers. You'd see it in higher prices for electronics, clothing, building materials, lots of things.
So the idea that China will eat those tariffs,
That's a bit of an oversimplification. I mean, sure, Chinese exporters might absorb some of the cost to try and stay competitive, maybe lower their margins a bit, but a tariff of that magnitude, it's highly likely to be largely paid by American consumers and businesses through higher prices. Historically, very high tariffs often lead to increased domestic prices, and they can trigger retaliatory tariffs from other countries, which hurts overall trade. And the former president also stated that China was ripping us off to the tune of $1 trillion a year,
Hmm.
and mentioned similar issues with places like the European Union. What's the economic basis for that kind of statement?
Okay, the $1 trillion figure, that likely refers to the annual trade deficit with China.
Right, the import-export difference.
Exactly. The difference between the value of goods and services we import from China versus what we export to them. Now, while a large trade deficit can be a point of concern, and it's definitely a subject of debate regarding trade practices, framing it simply as ripping us off kind of oversimplifies a really complex economic relationship. There are lots of factors. Consumer demand here, global supply chains, how competitive different economies are.
So it's not just about unfair practices?
Not necessarily, no. Trade imbalances aren't always indicative of unfair practices alone. It's much more nuanced than that.
Interesting. And then there's this apparent contradiction. The former president claims to be in negotiations with China over tariffs.
Right, he said they were talking.
But China has reportedly denied any such talks are happening. What's the significance when you see a discrepancy like that?
Well, a disconnect between stated diplomatic engagements and, official confirmations from the other nation involved, it raises questions about the accuracy of the information being presented.
Yeah.
And it can impact international trust, diplomatic efforts. Transparency in these matters is generally seen as pretty crucial for effective foreign policy.
Okay. Moving on to some of the more, shall we say, colorful statements that have been flagged recently. On News Nation, he was asked about academic freedom at Harvard. And the former president brought up riots in Harlem, claiming people from Harlem were protesting Harvard, while also saying he has a very high black vote. How do we even unpack that response?
Yeah, that response seemed to conflate some pretty distinct issues. Concerns about academic freedom at a university like Harvard and social or political demonstrations that might happen in a community like Harlem. They aren't really directly related. And additionally, making broad claims about electoral support from specific demographic groups, like having a very high black vote, really needs to be grounded in detailed analysis of actual election data, not just general assertions.
It definitely felt like a bit of a leap in logic, perhaps. There were also mentions of the former president claiming his administration won 9-0 at the Supreme Court regarding the return of Abrago Garcia.
Yeah, that name wasn't quite right, was it? And the case details seemed fuzzy.
Right, the specifics seemed unclear, and also claiming he was doing 200 trade deals, which, is more countries than actually exist. What's the impact when you hear these kinds of inaccuracies?
Well, repeated inaccuracies in factual claims, especially when they concern things like legal proceedings or international agreements, they can erode public trust in the information being put out there.
Yeah.
And it can hinder informed public discourse, right? Precision in these areas is pretty vital, you'd think.
Okay, let's turn to reactions from elected officials. Democratic Congressman Raja Krishnamurthy has been quite vocal, voicing concerns about the former president's fitness.
Yes, he has.
He also alleged that figures like Stephen Miller were the key architects of some controversial policies, like deportations. What's the broader context there? Is that a common view?
It's pretty common in political discussions to attribute specific policies to particular advisors or individuals within an administration. People want to know who's behind the curtain, so to speak.
Yeah.
Understanding how policies get developed and implemented often requires looking at the roles played by various officials, the advisors, and the documented processes behind those decisions. So pointing to Miller is part of that analysis for critics.
Okay. Krishnamurthy also mentioned that he's hearing from people across the country, his constituents presumably, who are concerned about the former president's behavior, even if it's not always like front page news in the corporate media. What does that suggest to you?
It suggests that public concern and discussion about these issues might actually extend beyond the major media narratives, that these things are being actively discussed within communities, person to person. It kind of highlights the importance of considering a wide range of information sources and individual observations, too, when you're trying to gauge public sentiment. It's not just what's on TV or the big websites.
He also flagged the potential real-world consequences of some of the former president's proposed policies, like tariffs impacting small businesses.
Hmm.
He mentioned a fruit importer facing maybe a 10% tariff,
Right.
and also the sort of double whammy for soybean farmers. Can you elaborate on those specific economic pain points?
Yeah, those are really concrete examples of how trade policies can directly affect businesses and individuals on the ground. Tariffs increase the cost of imported goods, right? Which can be particularly tough for small businesses, often operating on pretty tight margins already. And for soybean farmers, it's like you said, a double hit. Tariffs imposed by other countries in retaliation for U.S. tariffs can significantly shrink their export markets, hitting their income. And then they might also face higher input costs if there are tariffs on things they need, like fertilizer maybe coming from Canada. So higher costs and lower sales. Not ideal.
Definitely not. And there was also mention of public outcry over potential cuts to big programs like Medicaid, Social Security, Medicare. Why do those programs always elicit such strong reactions?
Well, they're foundational, aren't they? They're huge social safety net programs providing really crucial support for millions and millions of Americans. We're talking healthcare, retirement income, disability benefits. So any suggestion of significant cuts or major changes to these programs, it typically generates widespread concern, not just among current beneficiaries, but also among people who anticipate relying on them down the road.
Yeah, it touches a lot of lives. Okay, looking at the broader political landscape now, it's been claimed, based on various polls, that the former president's current unpopularity is maybe at a historic high. What's the value, but also maybe the limitations of relying on polling data like that?
Public opinion polls, they offer a snapshot, right? A snapshot of public sentiment at a given time. And they can be useful for identifying trends.
Okay.
But it's really important to consider the methodology of each poll. How was it conducted? What's the margin of error? And crucially, public opinion can be pretty fluid. It changes.
So one poll isn't the whole story.
Exactly. While consistent polling showing high levels of unpopularity does suggest a significant segment of the population has concerns, it's still just one piece of the puzzle in understanding the overall political climate.
Gotcha. There have also been reports related to Congress of MAGA Republicans in the House acting very closely in lockstep with the former president. And even a suggestion of a new strategy where some House Republicans are apparently not responding to Democratic inquiries anymore, almost going silent and then acting like a pre-programmed AI was the phrase used.
Wow.
What are the potential implications if that kind of partisan divide deepens with one side essentially refusing to engage?
Well, a lack of communication and cooperation across party lines, it can significantly impede the basic functioning of government. It makes it incredibly difficult to pass legislation, to conduct oversight, to address critical issues. And that description, acting like pre-programmed AI, that's obviously a very critical commentary on what's perceived as a lack of independent engagement and genuine responsiveness in political discourse. It suggests people aren't thinking for themselves, just following orders.
And this behavior was reportedly observed specifically in the Oversight Committee. Now, there was also a suggestion floated that fear of Elon Musk's financial influence might be playing a role in enforcing party discipline among Republicans. What's the connection generally between big money and political alignment?
Well, it's no secret that financial contributions can play a significant role in political campaigns and party dynamics. Money talks, as they say.
Right.
So the perception or the reality that major donors might exert influence over policy decisions or party stances, that's a recurring theme in discussions about campaign finance. It raises questions about potential impacts on political alignment and party discipline. It's why you hear so many calls for transparency in campaign finance to try and shed light on those potential influences.
Okay. Finally, let's look at the economic future. Congressman Krishnamurthy expressed a pretty stark outlook. He suggested things are going to get worse.
Yeah, that was quite pessimistic.
He used this analogy of the current situation being like a receding shoreline just before tsunami hits, and pointed to declining freight and trucking volumes as evidence. What do those specific economic indicators usually suggest?
Declining freight and trucking volumes can definitely be an early indicator of slowing economic activity. It means fewer goods are being moved around the economy.
Less stuff being bought and sold.
Exactly. So it often reflects a decrease in demand, both from businesses and consumers. It's a trend that economists monitor closely as a potential sign of weakening demand and maybe a broader slowdown.
He also used this really striking phrase, predicting a Tom Hanks moment.
Huh. Yeah, what did he mean by that?
I think the implication was a moment where the negative impact of current trends becomes suddenly undeniably obvious to everyone, potentially leading to panic, like in one of his disaster movies,
Oh,
maybe.
okay, gotcha.
And he contrasted natural stupidity in the White House with artificial intelligence. What's the underlying message in that kind of sharp rhetoric?
Well, the Tom Hanks moment analogy suggests a tipping point, a point of widespread public realization and concern about where things are headed. And the contrast between natural stupidity and AI, that's clearly a very sharp, very critical commentary on the decision-making processes being observed.
Mm.
It questions their rationality, their effectiveness, maybe their basis in reality.
Krishnamurthy also voiced a belief that the economy is actually heading for a recession. And he linked it specifically to tariffs and their potential impact on economic contraction, which could then lead to job losses.
What's the economic argument connecting tariffs to a potential recession?
The argument basically goes like this. Tariffs increase costs for businesses, right? That can lead them to reduce investment, maybe hold off on hiring, or even lay people off. Plus, retaliatory tariffs from other countries can harm U.S. export markets, further hurting businesses.
Okay.
And since a common definition of a recession is 2 consecutive quarters of negative economic growth, or GDP shrinkage, concerns about GDP shrinking linked to these trade policies reflect a worry about a broader economic downturn and layoffs.
His final point seemed to be a call to action. For people listening, for citizens to engage with these policies at a local level, talk to their representatives, hold them accountable. And he mentioned polling data suggesting a potential shift in political sentiment that Democrats might capitalize on.
Yeah.
What's the role of citizen engagement in actually influencing policy? Oh, it's fundamental. In a democracy, citizen engagement, whether it's contacting elected officials, participating in town halls, public discourse, organizing, and of course voting, it's the core mechanism for influencing policy. It's how you hold elected officials accountable to the needs and concerns of the people they represent. It's supposed to be a two-way street.
So to briefly wrap this up then, we've explored quite a range of observations and concerns today, haven't we? All surrounding the former president's recent statements and actions.
We have.
Touching on everything from potential questions about his fitness for office, his grasp of certain key issues, right through to the potential impact of his proposed policies, like tariffs, and the reactions we're seeing from different corners of the political spectrum.
It's definitely a complex and rapidly evolving situation. And understanding these different facets, these different observations, is pretty crucial for anyone trying to make sense of the current political landscape.
So here's maybe a final thought for you, our listener, to mull over. Given this range of observations and concerns we discussed, what does it all mean for public discourse? For the ability of citizens like you to discern fact from fiction in today's information landscape? It feels harder than ever sometimes.
It really does. In an era where information spreads so incredibly fast and from so many different sources, some reliable, some not so much the ability of citizens to critically evaluate what they're seeing and hearing, to distinguish factual reporting from opinion or even deliberate misinformation. It's just paramount.
And what responsibility do different media outlets bear in this environment?
Oh, a significant one. Media outlets bear a huge responsibility to adhere to journalistic standards, accuracy, fairness, providing context to give the public reliable information to navigate these complex issues. It's a vital role.
Absolutely. Well, that's all the time we have for today. Thanks for tuning into Pulse of the People. If you found value, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Catch you in the next episode where your voice always matters.